jobs and housing. Currently we're at 14 full-time sweepers, 6 people with full-time jobs, and we're growing every 2 weeks. We have a promise of growing 2 people every 2 weeks. We are currently taking the Lava May position as well, starting on January 23rd at DMV. They'll be there at 10 a.m. So we actually got the showers up here now. So if you see a homeless person that's on the street in front of your house or whatever, you can let them know that there's a place to shower starting every Saturday, starting January 23rd from 10 to 3 p.m. And that's all.
And that's Saturday
the 23rd.
Where is it going to be located?
It's at the DMV.
And do you have contact information that you want me to write up?
My name.
I'm just going to put your first.
Yeah, 415 933 3873. That's a fact. Thank you.
And some of us were at the hearing today, which I think there were a few hearings, but as some of you may remember, back in October, we hosted a press conference regarding the Haight-Ashbury infrastructure. I described it as a debacle. I think DPW described it as a project. And so myself and Kristen Evans from the Haight-Ashbury Merchant Association were asked to give presentations. So we spoke in front of Supervisors Breed, Yee, and he's so new I forget his name. Haskin, thank you. Yes, I am a horrible president of the Haight-Ashbury forgetting Haskin's name. Anyways, that's true. That's true. Overall, it was okay, kind of what you would expect. Many of the folks from PG&E, SFPUC, California PUC, all seem to come to the same conclusion, that it was Synergy's fault. We pointed out that some of their information was not super accurate, and it seemed like there was some heat being put on DPW, so that was kind of nice. Oddly enough, only one of the 5 gas line breaches was reported to the California PUC, and that was kind of our reaction.
And that's because it was on ABC News.
Oh, and it was because it was on ABC News. Sorry, Walter, but Hoodline was not a major media source for the California PUC to pick up on it and find out about it. But we want to thank Hoodline for covering the story, because without Hoodline, a lot of it would not have even done. But the good news is there is pressure being put on DPW that, they report every.
They're now along the process to really get rid of them and bring somebody else in.
Oh, thank you. Gelati Brothers was not fired, and they are currently working on bringing in 2 new subcontractors, one to work on the water and one to work on the sewer. Synergy had been in charge of both. So the project will go on at some point, and they're working on bringing in a subcontractor. So I want to bring up Calvin Welch on the board here of HANC. Many of you know him, to kind of talk about our subject tonight and introduce the panel. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any of those sign-in sheets that are done? Let's get them to the end of the row and leave them there.
And that's Tess Wellborn, who keeps us all on our toes. So this evening we're going to talk about the, in my humble opinion, wildly misnamed affordable housing density bonus. I think it's more accurate to refer to it as a developer's density bonus, because that's truly, honestly, what it is. And we are very lucky tonight to have 4 panelists that have devoted an extraordinary amount of time and energy to understanding this question and have some very real background. We have Paul Weber, a member of the Telegraph Hill Dwellers Executive Committee, and its representative to the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods, and was the drafter of a very extensive communication to the Planning Commission laying out the concerns and position of the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods. We also are very fortunate to have Joseph Smith, who's a co-founder of People Power Media, and a longtime student and practitioner of affordable housing development. Joseph was the executive director of the Burnham Heights Community Foundation when it developed the replacement housing for a large public housing development, Burnham Dwelling. Joseph has practical hands-on experience in affordable housing development as well as community organizing. And finally, we have Dean Preston and Gus Hernandez from the Affordable Divisadero Coalition, of which the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council is a part. Gus and Dean have headed up as joint coordinators an effort to respond to a density bonus program that was kind of a surprise to us all, that Supervisor Freed announced basically when it was done for Divisadero. That more than doubled the density, allowable density, with no additional requirements for affordable housing, initially telling us that it was illegal to require more affordable housing. Affordable Divisadero was created to respond to that and do a community plan in record time, in the most well-adjusted adult coalition I've ever been part of, which is saying something in San Francisco. The Affordable Divisadero Coalition produced in 6 weeks?
A couple plans?
Yeah, a plan in 6 weeks that addresses neighborhood concerns and provides a model, I would argue, for a density bonus program that allows greater density, but within a very real set of constraints that are beneficial to neighborhood and community groups. You will understand that this debate has been characterized by the rolling out of the ever-to-be frightful term NIMBY, that if you are opposed to increases in residential density and affordable housing, you are a NIMBY by definition, and to be opposed to the proposal of the Department of City Planning is to be a NIMBY. What I would like to do before we get to the panel is to go through very briefly, honestly, what the Affordable Housing Density Bonus Program is, and what the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council's concerns and position is, because at the end of the day, we're going to ask support for the Haight-Ashbury Neighborhood Council board position and support for the Affordable Divisadero plan. So, without further ado, we can start. Okay.
I can't make it bigger, so.
How's that for visibility?
Well, yeah, it's I guess my error. I don't.
Let me just see that.
Okay, we're gonna fix this because we're in the land of high tech, and we all know how to do this.
If you check the
Really
high
well.
speed internet in the Haight, we're not in the land.
Better.
This is the standard handout of the Department of City Planning that defines the program. Unfortunately, we've cut out the state mandated program. Very basically, what the Planning Department is proposing is to allow a density bonus if a developer agrees to meet the existing inclusionary zoning requirement on site of 12% housing able to be afforded by households between 50 and 120% of median, either ownership or rental, depending upon what the base project is, whether or not it's a condo or an apartment building. And if the developer agrees to add an additional 18% for middle income which is defined by the planning department as units able to be afforded by households earning 140% of median. So the 30%, if you agree to do 12%, which you're already required to do, an additional 18%, which you are currently not required to do, of producing housing able to be afforded by people earning 140% of median.
What's median?
Median in San Francisco for a for a single individual is, help me out there. I knew somebody was going to ask that.
77.
Yeah, $74,000 for a household of four. It's about about $100,000. 140% of median for a household of four is about $150,000 for a single individual. It's about $100,000. In many parts of San Francisco, 140% of median is market rate. So this program is to meet the requirements, a recent requirement of a state-mandated density bonus program for affordable housing. And unfortunately, what is cut off here is that the state is for 20%, 12% up to 120% of median, but the additional 8% of the state also only up to 120% of median. So could we, the blue area is the area that is, it's over 30,000 parcels in San Francisco will be directly subject to the density bonus program. As you can see, virtually all of the Haight Ashbury is covered. A good part of the inner Richmond, most of the Western Addition. District 5 is heavily represented, as is the northern part of District 6, District 3, and some very interesting parts of District 7. But the law also allows the density bonus to be applied to, state law allows it to be applied to, next slide please, areas within 1/2 mile of transit corridors, which means, that's the brown here, which means virtually all of San Francisco will be subject to this density bonus program.
Calvin, is that a 1/2 mile on either side of the transit corridor? Or is it
Yes.
a 1/4 mile on either side?
I'm sorry, it's 1/4 mile on either side. Okay. Next. So, what is not made clear in the handouts, these two former slides were handouts from the Department of City Planning, are the following points. No other Bay Area jurisdiction counts 140% of median income as being affordable. ABAG and our own housing element classifies anything over 120% of median being market rate. So as people may know, we have an affordable house, we have a housing requirement suggested by the Association of Bay Area Governments, which defines that 62% of all new housing should be affordable, which is defined by ABAG as between 0 and 120% of median. ABAG defines 140% of median as being market rate housing and will not meet our housing, our regional housing requirement. The proposed legislation would allow lot consolidations of up to 120 linear feet per block. That's 1/2 block. So they will allow mergers, lot mergers, consolidations for a single project that will be 120 feet of frontage of a block. A block is generally, the developed part of a block is generally 250 feet. So we're talking about 1/2 block will be allowed to be put together no matter what the base zoning is under the new density bonus program. The main objective of the program is to provide housing affordable to middle-income people who do not meet income guidelines of the city's affordable housing program. That is to say, 120% of median or below. It is a policy of the Lee administration that people earning 140% of median need housing assistance. Can't argue with them. The question is whether or not this is the best way to do it. People understand we have rent control. Rent control covers about 140,000 units in San Francisco. Rent control is not means tested. You can earn whatever income you have, you want, and if you're in a rent-controlled unit, you get the benefits of rent control. It's not means tested. It's not based upon what your income is, although there have been proposals to do so. In fact, in 2002, in a study done for the Board of Supervisors, it was found that 30%, 40,000 units of rent-controlled units are inhabited by people earning 140% of median and above. So the planning department ignores the existing rent control program as being a middle-class housing subsidy program. It's as if it doesn't exist. They're only interested in new construction, meeting that need, not in preserving existing rent control units, which in fact house 40,000 people earning between 140% of median and above, because rent control is not, quote-unquote, means tested.
Sounds like urban renewal.
The proposed program would eliminate conditional use hearings for all density bonus projects. Instead, discretionary review hearings only would be allowed. This shifts the burden of proof, for those of you who know. In a conditional use hearing, the proponent, the developer, must prove that the project is beneficial and necessary. The burden of proof is on the developer. By making it a discretionary review in which neighbors have to request that there be a hearing and pay a rather large fee, it shifts the fee from the developer to the neighbors, and it shifts the burden of proof to the neighbors. The neighbors have to prove why the project should not be built. It's a significant swing from the historic standard of project approval in San Francisco. The proposed program would end the current CU hearings for specific commercial uses in 30 neighborhood commercial streets. As folks may know, Haight Street is one of 30 neighborhoods that are governed by neighborhood commercial controls in Article 7 of the Planning Code that deal with mainly size commercial uses, but also specifically, we have a big thing about fast food in the Haight. We don't want any more fast food restaurants. So any fast food restaurant that is above 4,000 feet has to apply for a conditional use. That would be gone. The only conditional use hearings that would be required were those that were passed by the voters around chain stores. So we have controls on tobacco shops and smoke shops on Haight Street. We've got controls on drive-through uses on Haight Street. All of those controls that are basically controlled by the requirement of a public hearing would be gone. There would be no such controls for any new commercial development built pursuant to the density bonus program. That would also mean, I hasten to point out, less protections for existing neighborhood serving retail uses. The proposed program would end the specific floor area ratio, this is a little bit inside the beltway, but bear with me, for various existing zoning districts. Currently, under zoning classifications in San Francisco, by virtue of that zoning classification, there are certain maximum numbers of units that you can build on a lot depending upon that lot size. In RH3, which is, in RM3, which is what most of the Haight-Ashbury is, it's about 4 units. That would be gone. instead a very interesting, how many folks know that we do ranked choice voting in San Francisco? And that there is a formula used after the votes are cast. There's this black box special sauce formula that's used to allocate everybody else's votes. Nobody understands that formula. No, nobody can even describe what that formula is. I mean, this is beyond Google stuff. It's major stuff. Well, meet the new one, and the new one is called form-based density. And form-based density is a 4-step formula that is negotiated between the developer and the planning staff, and you come out with how many units you can have.
Endless.
And it's basically whatever deal you can make. There is no longer a relationship between the number of units and the size of the lot under
What about height limits?
form-based
Does that affect the
density.
height limits?
Excuse me?
Does that affect the height limits?
Well, they are proposing to give 2 floors. If you qualify for this, you get off the top 20 additional feet. So the new form-based density is based upon that 20 feet and a configuration. It's a 4-step, go to the ordinance, it's on the planning department's webpage, read it and tell me if you understand it. It allows, just let me finish, it allows 80% lot coverage. In our neck of the woods, right now, only for new construction, only about 60% of the lot is allowed to be covered. This allows 80% or 15 feet from the back lot line, whichever is bigger. So imagine having backyards no deeper than 15 feet. And being allowed to have a neighbors tear down that house and build a building that is 2 floors above what is zoned and 15 feet from the rear lot line. There's a 75% reduction in both commercial and residential parking. And there is a 5% reduction in common open space. Finally, the only environmental review mandated by the program would be on shadow and wind impacts on public land, not on private land. So somebody could build a building much taller than yours, that goes much deeper than yours, that puts your backyard in full shadow, and you've got no recourse.
Don't the people have allowance to on facade?
Well, that's the front, if you want to try to deal with the back by affecting the facade of the front.
But if you don't like, the neighborhood doesn't like the facade, can they oppose it?
Sure, and we can get those nice Greek columns replacing, but the problem is the massive nature of what is allowed. There's no protection for existing rent-controlled apartments or neighborhoods serving retail. Next one. There was, for that reason, on the 19th of November, the Haight Ashbury Neighborhood Council took the following position. We oppose the Affordable Housing Density Bonus Program as drafted due to its application to already developed neighborhood shopping streets and adjacent locations. The proposal as drafted will produce massive displacement of existing tenants and residents serving businesses.
Calvin, Supervisor Breed just introduced a new amendment excluding any building that contains a rent-controlled unit.
No, she did not.
Either just for 1 year?
No, she did not. I will, let's go to the next slide.
Well, no, they're saying that they're.
No, that, Hoodline reported that. Hoodline reported, this is Kirsten Dissinger, the planning department's program manager, at a hearing 2 nights ago.
Yeah.
In an existing parcel, if an existing parcel has an existing rent control unit, it's not eligible for this program, said Dissinger. citing a, quote, friendly amendment by Supervisor London Breed that would add this condition to the final affordable housing bonus program. Later in the week, Dissinger said her office will publish a case report on the that officially excludes parcels with rent-controlled units from participating. I heard about that. I contacted Breed's office on the 7th, and this is what her aide wrote me. We're finishing the language now, and I'm sending it out to a few interested folks. Once it's done, happy to add you to the list. I haven't got it yet. For your information, the amendment banned the application to rent-controlled units for 1 year or until planning and the Board of Supervisors adopt a comprehensive policy to deal with rent control and tenant protection, whichever comes later.
That was confirmed today, that's the language.
Okay.
That's-
And on the 3rd of December, John Rahm, the director of the Department of City Planning, specifically said on the question of banning the application of the program to rent control, an outright ban on the demolition of buildings with rent-controlled units may not be the wise thing to do. We might want to allow it where the balance is so much higher in BMR units than rent-controlled units.
Below market rate.
BMR is below market rate, which are all means tested. So he's equating, in order to benefit households of middle income people, proposing a BMR program that has means testing to replace rent control, which has no means testing. It's an odd formulation, but no one has seen the legislation. The legislation is described by both the planning department and by Breed's office is a 1-year program until they come up with a way to, quote, deal with rent control and tenant protections. Yes.
Well, as of today, Dissinger was saying that there was no year limit on that.
She's wrong.
Well, no one's seen the legislation.
Okay.
Excuse me, she repeated the same words yesterday morning at the spur meeting. Exact same word that you have on the screen.
Yes.
Yeah, Calvin, I was down at Breed's office today, and that's exactly the language Connor Johnson, her aide, told me. But I wanted to tell you something that we heard from Dissinger on Tuesday, at the Hall of Flowers, in which somebody asked, well, can this program apply to building on top of an existing structure? And she said, no. It must be on either flat land, parking lot, or gas station, or the building that's there has to be demolished. So we said, that means this program is a mandate for demolition, and there was no refusal. That's right, this program requires demolition.
So, as I can see, the mere description of the program has reached unanimity, so I want to, at this point, we're going to pick up questions from the audience. I want at this point to ask our panel to come up and make their presentations, and perhaps some of your questions can be answered in the course of the discussion. I'll call on you after the presentation. Okay? So, Paul, Gus, Dean, Joseph, get a seat. Take a seat.
Calvin, do you still need, will you still need this? No?
So first, I'll ask Paul from Telegraph Hill to make his presentation. And then if it's okay with you guys, Joseph, and then the board will be here.
Good evening, and thank you for having me. Our president is at a District 3 meeting tonight, urging the staff to trash the existing program. Is urging the staff, the Planning Commission, to cancel the current program and start over. And we're hoping that other associations will urge that same thing as aggressively as they possibly can.
Do we need to wait to applaud?
city has been saying they must adopt these programs because the state law requires it because of the case that came down in 2013. Without boring you with the details, number one, all the case said was that in setting density bonuses and in determining the number of units that are qualifying, one must include the units from whatever the local agency's inclusionary program is. That's all it said.
Excuse me, could you speak up just a little bit?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Could you identify yourself, please?
Paul Weber from the Telegraph Hill Neighborhood Association and the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods.
Sorry, I'll speak louder. Is that, can the people in the back now hear? All right. The city has been urging the passage of this program, they say, because there's a case that came down in 2013 that mandates it. Without boring you with the details, it's just incorrect. The law that they're talking about, which I'll mention briefly, was enacted in 1979. The city tells us, generically, that they have rarely made use of it, or the developers have rarely made use of it, and that when they do, they go through a special use district and go through a conditional use process. In other words, there are notices given and time for comment within the neighborhood. As part of the letter that we did at the coalition, and I've got copies over here for those of you who'd like to see it, we asked them to tell us in the last 5 years how many times the state program had been utilized. Please describe the project and give us the circumstances. We had 50 questions for them in our letter, and to date, as of right now, we've received no answer at all. But we're under the impression that it's been used very little. Secondly, the state program only, underscore only, applies to low-income housing for most circumstances and moderate income housing for condominiums and other group programs. The city's so-called local program applies to middle-income housing, and that's what Calvin was just talking about, and that's where they get up to that 140% of AMI. State law doesn't require that. This was a device put together by the mayor and the other, quote, partners, unquote, who came up with this program. They've done no real sampling. They've done 9 hypotheticals as to how this would work. And they've also come up with what I believe to be erroneous financial projections. They're assuming that as projects are built, the land price will stay the same. And I would love to get a hold of some of that property that's going to stay the same 3 years from now. So we've again requested the details on how they arrived at those conclusions. Again, no answers. So coming back to the program which they seem to be pushing the most, which is called the local program, they are also, we believe, violating Prop K from last year, or from now 2014, so that's 2 elections ago. And I'll explain why. As Calvin mentioned, the ratio required under the local program between medium income and inclusionary housing is roughly 50-50 to get up to the maximum required or permitted. That's the other thing. They take you all the way to the maximum. They don't let you come in for a smaller program, which the state does. But in any event, the relationship or ratio between medium income and low housing is 50-50. If one looks carefully at Proposition K, and by carefully I mean the ballot arguments, that was a city-sponsored measure, if you all remember. And the ballot argument was signed by His Honor and a number of illustrious supervisors. In that ballot argument, they talk about a need for 50% affordable housing, or working class housing, not a defined term, just working class housing, of which, they said, 33% would be low income and 17% would be middle income. That ain't how it came out in their proposal. And I urge you to go back and read that part of it pretty carefully. And we've pointed that out to them, that we think they're making an erroneous presentation and erroneous allocation based on the 2014 measure, which they sponsored. The mention earlier by questions of what's going to happen to rent-controlled housing. Let me briefly explain how it works under state law. It's addressed under state law, and it was only addressed effective January of 2015. What it basically says is, if there is housing that is under rent control and is going to be destroyed, it will be replaced, but it will not be replaced with rent-controlled housing. It will be replaced with low and lower income housing. In other words, it's not rent control to rent control. It's to eligible classification, rent control to eligible classification. Or as Calvin points out, there's no means test for rent control. With respect to Supervisor Bree, I received today a completely revised edition of this program. And I've gotten red-eyed between about 3:30 this afternoon and when I got here, comparing the two because they're not marked. So I was reading our 42-pager against their new 52-pager, and all I was doing was reading, not to digest it, but merely to find the changes. A couple I did look for, though. One of them was, have they done anything about rent control? And the answer is no, they have not. Someone was suggesting if Bree was going to get that in, she was going to have to go through the mayor's office and Tang's office to get them to support it, because otherwise she has to get a vote of the Board of Supervisors. I'm not familiar with those ground rules, so I really don't know, but I know it's not in there. So for those of you who are counting on it and had conversations with her office, I urge you to at least maybe pick up the phone and ask about it. But at the end of the day, this program, this package is not what San Francisco should be adopting. We really need something where the so-called partners involved are more than just those who have a very large economic stake in developing. It's kind of build, baby, build in San Francisco.
That's for sure.
So, as I said earlier, we're hoping that that's what the various associations are going to be pushing. Doing away with the program, creating some type of a meaningful working group, which is a little smaller than we the people, and come up with a new program. Now that means going back to the basics of what is our goal here? Well, to me, the goal is go back to what Prop K said. That seems to be the starting place. If that's going to be changed, well, let's vote on changing it. But to me, that's the starting place. And if I have anything to say about it, I'm going to keep pitching that and pitching that and pitching that. What is our goal here? Where did middle income come from? Why are we adding middle income? But remember, folks, we've got to give cover to the supervisors. If you're a progressive supervisor, it's awfully hard to vote against something entitled affordable housing, especially if you've just campaigned on it a few weeks ago to get reelected. Moreover, some of those same supervisors are up for reelection come next November. So it's, as I say, it's going to be a difficult task for them, and it's up to us, the neighborhoods, to be able to give them cover as to how they're going to do it. And issues such as rent control, Prop 45 seem to me to be a good place to start. Thank you.
Okay, my name is Joseph Smook. I'm co-founder of People Power Media. I also work at the Housing Rights Committee of San Francisco. We just opened a new housing rights center in the Richmond district, so I'm excited to be providing tenant counseling to residents on the west side. I handed around this. I know I didn't have enough copies, but you can find this article online at peoplepowermedia.net. So I'll just kind of use that as a visual. But I just want to hit on just a few things that haven't been touched on yet. Number one, kind of the clever marketing of this program. It was called the Affordable Housing Density Bonus Program. Long name, lots of letters in the acronym, right? Go on the website now, the word density is no longer in the title, right? Very clever. Now it is an affordable housing program, right? It's pretty cool what planning does. The other thing is, London Breed has complicated things, okay? There was a comment by Commissioner Catherine Moore saying, this program doesn't work. Okay, this was an informational hearing, this program doesn't work. And one of the things that you guys are hearing in public comment is that you can't target rent-controlled housing. The response now from London Breed is, we're gonna take that off the table for a year. What does that mean? It's all political. What's happening this year? What's happening in November? We have an election in District 5, okay? So, so that's another thing. Just be careful about the language. Now it's an affordable housing program, and now we're taking rent-controlled housing off the table, but just until I kind of get through my election thing. So another thing, we actually met with her, and we showed her this map. So the map that Calvin showed, it has blue on all the parcels that would be targeted by this program. Okay, it's 31,000 parcels throughout San Francisco. We showed it to London Breed. Her apartment's on. That was fun. A lot of people have been saying, damn, my parcel, or where I live is on this map. The curious thing too is that they have a whole website, Planning Department has a whole website about this program, right? Try to find the map through that website. It's really, really hard. They created this map, okay? Planning created this map. Try to find it. It's really difficult. It's one of the reasons why we published it. And we not only published it, but published photographs of the places that are on this map, because it's not just a map. These are our communities, right? And there's a reason why they don't want you to see the map, because it's pretty much everywhere. It's where all of us live, which is what Calvin was mentioning. Okay, remember the last time a big project didn't have to go through environmental review? Think about one.
Say that
Okay,
again.
think about it, the last time a big project, a big development project did not have to go through an environmental review. They all have to, right? Every big project in the city has to go through some level of environmental review. This program is coming up for a vote at Planning Commission on January 28th. Okay, that's pretty soon. An EIR has not been circulated about this program, right? Okay, the curious thing is that this program was supposed to have been voted on back in December, but it got continued to January 28th after extensive debate, right? There had to be pushback on the Planning Commission in order to get there to be more discussion in our communities and at the Planning Commission about this program. The response to where's the EIR was, from staff, was, oh, yeah, we're working on it, we'll have it for you in time for the vote. Literally, that's where it's at. So no circulation of an EIR, no ability for the public to comment on what the what the environmental impacts are for this program. And when you look at area plans, when you look at we have a transportation sustainability fee that just got passed. Is this going to trigger a higher rate of transportation sustainability fee? Not necessarily. Is it actually going, anyway, are we going to be reconciling basically all of the area plans that already have EIRs? Are they going to redo their EIRs? Because now there's a new kind of density control in those area plans? No, not necessarily. So it raises a ton of questions about how do we do planning, right? How do we impact communities? Okay, another point is that, so one of the things that gets really confusing for planning commissioners, for supervisors, is that there's this kind of rhetoric around compliance with state law, right? And we can argue kind of back and forth whether maybe we're already in compliance with state law. We've already enacted density bonuses through the eastern neighborhoods. through the Desidero planning, right? Through all kinds of neighborhood planning that's already happened, where there's all kinds of density bonuses. We've done all kinds of things to incentivize development in the city. But there's the compliance piece, right? And are we in compliance with the state mandate, around allowing developers to build more housing, basically? Okay, that's one part of it. But then they're also mixing it up with an incentive. They're looking around at all the parcels that the city deems being underdeveloped and saying, how do we incentivize developers to develop those? Because they haven't been developed yet. Those are two really, really different things, okay? Another thing is that they've identified 240 parcels where you could develop a significant amount of housing, and those parcels have basically nothing on them, right? They generally have a parking lot on them. But what they're doing is they're saying, okay, well, we've got these 240 parcels that are kind of the examples or the priorities, but then there's also these 31,000 other ones. And why are they lumped together, right? Why are they lumped together? Because there was a report from the city's chief economist that said a couple of things. It said, number one, if we build more housing, housing will become cheaper. It also said, right, it also said that where we build new housing, all the housing around it gets cheaper. I'm not kidding. Okay? City's chief economist, Ted Egan, put out a report that said, where you build new housing, number one, actually, that housing has mostly been populated by people who already live in the city. There's nobody new who's moving into that housing. It's all for us, because we can afford that new housing. And somehow miraculously, all the housing around it gets cheaper, which means that in order to make San Francisco cheaper, we need to build more housing, and we need to tear down all the old housing. That's basically what that report says. So the mayor's office is working on that ideology, and that is being manifested in this program. And so what it's saying is that in order for San Francisco to house our workforce, is to bump the AMI levels up. We need to make middle-income housing, but it's not really middle-income housing. They also conveniently look at the housing balance that we passed in 2014, and they forget that it's 50%. If people look at the monitoring report that came out in September of last year about the housing balance, it says that the housing balance is 33%, but it's not. It's 50%. And we had an argument during public comment with the director of planning when we said it's actually 50%, and he tried to argue with us that it's not 50%, that it's 33%. The housing balance. So the housing balance, which was Proposition K, which was passed by the voters in 2014, which said that the city, as we develop housing, needs to maintain a balance of at least 50% of our housing affordable to between low to middle income, what they call working class housing, relative to the market rate housing, which would be the other 50%. Okay? And then there was a monitoring report that came out in September of last year that showed over the 10-year period up to 2015 that we're way out of balance. And the reason why we're way out of balance is that we developed some affordable housing, either through below market rate units or through other affordable housing development programs, through mainly nonprofit development. And we're losing rent-controlled housing as quickly as we're developing new affordable housing. So the balance, we're way out of balance. We're not reaching the 50%. In fact, we're not meeting it.
How are we losing rent-controlled housing?
Yeah, through owner move-in evictions, through Ellis Act evictions, and through demolitions.
Can I explain the bizarro points you made? Kirsten Dissinger, on January 6th, presented this whole program as based on Prop K. Then, a week later, yesterday at noontime, she presented it to Spur and said, no, not really, it's really based on the law that was passed, state law that was passed in 1979. And one of the reasons she said that we were going to get such a wonderful bump in affordable housing was because most of San Francisco was not currently built to the maximum allowed. So we have lots of 2- and 3-story buildings where the zoning allows 3 or 4. And with the additional 2 floors, it can now go to 5 or 6, or 7 if they want to go for a higher percent. So this is probably why The Economist is telling you, you know, that building new housing, you know, actually makes the property next to it go down in value.
Yeah, so a couple of points that I just want to make just to close this out, is that this idea that there may be a building there, wherever it is, one of those 31,000 sites, most of them, because if 240 sites are vacant kind of parking lots, subtract 240 from 31,000, it's pretty much most of the sites, right? That we're looking at, well, there's somebody living there, okay? And if somebody's living there, what they've said is that that person has a right to return. It kind of sounds like redevelopment. But the interesting thing, as bad as redevelopment was, we were holding a government entity accountable to the new development. Here you're going to have landlords all over the city, right? Developers all over the city. And how are you going to make sure that I just bought that property and I'm going to clear out the building because now I need it to be vacant, and someday I'm going to demolish that building then, and then maybe I'm going to develop it if the market's okay? When's that going to happen? How long is that tenant going to be displaced? And so they have a right to return. How did we manage that through redevelopment? A lot of people had certificates of preference, right? Did they really come back to the Fillmore? Did they really come back to the Bayview? I mean, so now we're not talking about a government entity that we can hold accountable through democratic process, or, you know, I mean, the redevelopment commission was kind of indirect, obviously, but here we're just talking about landlords. We're talking about hundreds of landlords throughout the city. So that's number one, right? We have a right to return issue. They also say that below market rate housing is better than rent control. As Calvin mentioned, rent controlled housing isn't means tested. So now what? I have to make $200,000 a year in order to be able to choose where I want to live, and not have my blood tested every time I want to apply for an apartment. Okay, so that's one problem. Another is that even if I did have my right to return and I got to move back into the apartment, this new apartment building that I was displaced from, number one is that the rent will be what it is just for me. Once I move out, then it will adjust to being a below market rate unit. There's no rent protection any longer because of state law, because of cost of housing. Okay, so that's number one. Number two is that it's not really a rent-controlled unit, so I don't have recourse through the rent board, right? I don't have a lot of the just cause kind of protections that I had when it was a rent-controlled unit. There's not an equivalency. This is the other ideology that we've been hearing in meetings with the planning department, is they really feel that below market rate units are better than rent control. I'm not going to say that rent control is perfect. Obviously with vacancy decontrol, rent control is definitely not perfect. But BMR units don't necessarily provide a real replacement, even if you are able to move back. So anyway, there's...
Thank you, Joseph.
And overriding our neighborhood's zoning process developed over decades. You don't need to do it by packing in as many people as you can, by getting rid of all density, despite, again, zoning laws that have existed for decades and thoughtfully came into being. You don't override those without putting in place the kind of support, infrastructure support to transit, to your water lines and so forth, right? This idea that you just build it and everything magically is going to be okay is not the real world, right? You don't need to do that. And the reason I say that with such confidence is there's a way to get affordable housing without any of this. We've heard a lot about the details of this program, but what I wanted to be clear about is you could get this affordable housing, quote unquote, as Calvin, I think, debunked the myth of a lot of this being affordable, okay? But you could get this and more without destroying San Francisco neighborhoods. And how do you do that? It's called legislating.
You make them do it. You don't have to raise the height limits, pack in the, get rid of all the density limits, get rid of everything that makes our neighborhoods neighborhoods to require developers to build more affordable housing. Our affordable housing levels right now are a joke. 12% on site is all you have to do when you're developing, or you can pay a fee and do nothing affordable on site. So let's just be very clear, if our supervisors, if our mayor, planning department and so forth, if they wanted to promote affordable housing, they don't need to do any of this. And I think it's important as we push back on this, that that's what we demand. And the demand that they go back to square one on this, I mean, it shouldn't be a program that looks anything like this. It should be a program that looks like demanding a high level of truly affordable housing when developers are building. They're making plenty of money. There's absolutely no reason they can't include higher levels of affordable housing without doing this, having this kind of impact on neighborhoods. So switching to Diviz, so we got a little bit of a preview almost of this whole program. In last June, some of you may remember that Supervisor Breed authored legislation to make Divisadero a transit corridor, a transit district. And what that meant was that all the density controls that existed along Divisadero were lifted. And there was virtually no consultation with the neighborhood on this. When neighborhood groups reached out to Supervisor Breed's office, everyone was told that this was a relatively minor change, so it wasn't going to have a big impact, it's just sort of a technical change. Then it passes, and one of the developers on the site at 650 Divisadero, which is Divisadero and Grove, submitted their revised plans. They had done a 16-unit project. And there were probably mixed views in the neighborhood whether this was a good thing or not. Well, 16, overnight, once the strip was rezoned, became 60. And was a wall, big glass wall of something you expect to see across from the ballpark, right? I mean, it was not at all, not at all in sync with neighborhood character or design. So we were alarmed to see that shift because of that density legislation. And so we formed this, so that was basically before the summer, and then after we saw those plans, I think our first meeting was in mid-September. When we saw those plans and how dramatically it was increased, and there was a 158-unit project being proposed for Oak and Divisadero, and this is like within 2 blocks of each other, so it's clearly Divisadero was being targeted as now the city is being targeted for a lot of high-density, huge projects. So, we posted signs saying, let's have a community meeting about this, right? And about development along Divisadero. We expected, I don't know, 20, 25 people to show up. We had our first meeting, 75 people packing the back room of Club Wazima, a lot of interest. And what we found, and Gus will go into a little more sort of where we ended up through this process. But I want to give you the background of sort of how we got there. What we found was an incredible level of consensus at these meetings, and I'm sensing in this room probably something similar. It was not what you would read in the Chronicle about, some people want to build because they buy what Joseph described, that if we just build more, everything's going to be affordable and cheap for everyone, right? Nobody's buying it. At that meeting, what became immediately apparent is people felt like they were completely shut out of the process. People who, a lot of us who worked decades to protect the character of the neighborhood, regulate formula retail, right, and actually have community-based decisions, just felt completely blindsided by the rezoning of the entire area with no consultation with the neighborhood. That was the overriding point. People were outraged about that. People were also outraged about the idea of high-density housing without dealing with transit. If have you tried to take a bus, right? Yeah. And try to get on at Divisadero some morning. And then imagine that hundreds more units are there, and if their plans go through, thousands more people, right, trying to get on the same buses. right? So I think the infrastructure issues, like we're not prepared for that kind of density even if we wanted it, right? And the concerns about, and one of the overriding ones, and hence our name, Affordable Diviz Coalition, was if you're gonna upzone this neighborhood and override the community's wishes and so forth, it sure as hell better be affordable housing. So did you, in doing this legislation, also raise the affordable housing requirements? And the answer was no. So all the density controls on Divisadero were eliminated with no increase in the requirements for affordable housing. So that 16 unit that went up to 60 unit, they still were just bound by 12% affordable. So we pushed back, we had community meetings, we had a series of meetings. We identified early on, number one, that the community wants to be proactive and have our own plan, so that we're not just opposing project by project, but we're actually putting forth a consensus position of concerned neighbors about what we want for our neighborhood, and that we want to measure everything up against that. Some neighborhoods in the city have done that. Divisadero really didn't have any kind of plan like that. The second thing we wanted was to push back on the specific rezoning of Divisadero, the sort of precursor to a lot of this. Asking that the supervisor rescind that and come back, start again, kind of like you're saying, just start again here and actually consult neighborhoods. And we wrote a letter to that effect, and the supervisor respectfully declined. And then we also challenged her to add affordability if there's going to be rezoning. We went to the open house for this density, or the developer density bonus program. I like that. So we went to the open house. We were told at that open house, we said, why? We asked the planning department director, why would you upzone this neighborhood for so much density and not use that opportunity to require more affordable housing? And we were told with a shrug of the shoulder, we dropped the ball. So, you know, by the way, at that same time, Kirsten, who we've talked about, was very interested in why it wasn't a good thing to demolish rent-controlled housing as long as you put some BMRs back in. And why were we opposed to that? So this has been a problem all along. So, you know, we scheduled, so we had a series of meetings, and then we scheduled our community planning workshop at the Independent for a Saturday. And up till then, our requests that Supervisor Breed add more affordability and rescind the rezoning of Divisadero for unlimited density. Up until then, we just heard, no, we can't do that. As Calvin mentioned, it's illegal for us to add affordability because of Prop C and so forth. And lo and behold, the day before or 2 days before? The 2 days before our community planning workshop, Supervisor Breed did a press conference right in front of the Independent and the Harding there to announce that she was sponsoring legislation to double the affordability now as part of the rezoning of Divisadero. So we don't have time to get into the critique of that. I can guarantee you, it made for a good headline. I can guarantee you that not one unit of affordable housing will be built as a result of that doubling, because she doubled the inclusionary, but she didn't double the escape hatch that developers can use, which is to pay money instead of building the units. So she raised that by 5%. She doubled the inclusionary. So they're all just going to pay the fee, and we're not going to have any additional units. But regardless, it was a step in the right direction, and it was clearly a step in the right direction that resulted from the kind of turnout like you have here, and that we had on Divisadero to push back and to continue pushing back and to really be clear on our demands. So all of the community planning that we did in these sessions culminated in a plan that Gus is going to describe to you all, which is really the position of the Affordable Diviz Coalition. And I just, before I sit down, want to thank HANC and some of the folks, you know, certainly Tess and Calvin and others who have been part of the Affordable Diviz Coalition and really supported from the get-go of our effort along Divisadero before this density bonus program even came along to push back and have a really united front with the different neighborhood groups in the area. And so from the beginning, there's been a real sense that that the neighborhood groups, all of our groups, have really been ignored in this process. And you know, it's interesting that the only community meetings happened after this thing was proposed.
Right.
You know, that we weren't having, I think the city, if they were serious about this, right? If this wasn't just like a PR stuff, they were serious about density bonus program and wanting to hear the neighborhood's concerns, we would have had outreach meetings a year ago, 2 years ago. This is a radical rezoning of the city, not bought into by neighborhood groups, and it's remarkable the lack of outreach before pushing this forward. This thing has been fast-tracked, and we really need to demand that not our supervisor D5 and all the supervisors take a very clear position on this, which is to vote it down, and then to, if they want to affordability, they should just legislate affordability through a real inclusionary housing ballot measure. Okay? And if they want to reimagine all of our neighborhoods, this time they should do it with our consent. Thank you.
Just a point of clarification. I didn't quite understand you when you said the Divisadero plan did not raise the inclusionary requirement. So that is unlike the program that's being offered, which will bring it up to 30% from 12%, right?
Yes, so the original Divisadero legislation did not raise the affordability at all. Supervisor Breed, after our 3 months of organizing, introduced legislation. It's now in planning that raises that up.
Got it.
Were you able to stop the building of these mega structures you're talking about?
They're in the early stages, and we are engaged in that process, but they have not. They're in the preliminary. They haven't gotten any rights to develop yet. I want to make sure. I see a lot of hands, but I want to make sure Gus has it.
Dean got all the exciting parts. So my name is Gus Hernandez, and I'm on the board of the Alamo Square Neighborhood Association. I'm the president, but I'm actually stepping down. This is my last week on the board, just because I'm getting more involved with this. I can't be in too many meetings in 1 month. But basically, you know, as Dean described it, once we heard about the rezoning, we came together as a community group and said, you know, well, if you're not going to involve us, we're just going to do it ourselves. So when the meeting at the Independent was really kind of the highlight. We had 4 or 5 different, 4 different breakout groups where people got to choose, you know, do you want to talk about height? Do you want to talk about affordability? Do you want to talk about transit and infrastructure? Or neighborhood serving uses of what these new commercial uses are going to be like on the Divisadero. And so people, you know, basically we all were able to engage and share our vision for our neighborhood. After that meeting, we came back in January and we presented the plan to, actually it was December, we presented the plan to our group again, got more input from the people that attended that meeting, and then we finalized this just a couple days ago. So we're really excited about our plan here. I'm just going to walk you through really quickly what we talked about. There's 5 parts now. Divisadero, we talked about height and bulk and design principles, and basically saying, you know, if you're going to have any height, bulk, or density increases, it better have affordable housing. On-site, no off-site exceptions whatsoever. We talked about having minimum size of the units. We talked about having, and actually in this discussion, we voted to reject the affordable housing bonus program as Part 2 was affordability, and we really dived into it. You know, we said, yes, they should be mixed income developments. We shot for the stars and said we want half of those units to be affordable. Half of those units so we're talking about AMI. What's area median income? If you say 100% AMI, that means half the population makes less than that, half the population makes more than that. Well, we said, well then, why don't we make half of these units affordable to people making less than half of that median income? Makes sense, right? So that was our big breakdown there, our big moment of revelation. And we also talked about the importance of senior housing and how that's a priority for us as well. Infrastructure and transit was our third part. Obviously, any development that brings in a lot of new residents and tenants, we're going to need more muni services, more, you name it, we're going to need it. So we said, you know, we really need to tie that to any developments coming in. Everything from publicly accessible open spaces to bike-friendly street designs. We really were very thorough. And as Dean described, there was a lot of consensus in the room. Part 4 of our plan was the neighborhood serving retail uses. You know, we said we absolutely don't want any new formula retail as part of these projects. And we want to see more neighborhood serving retail. We want to encourage nonprofit use of any commercial spaces. And then finally, the neighborhood notice. You know, we're sick of being left out of this conversation. So we said anytime you have even an idea of building something new, we want to be involved. Let us know. Contact us, contact the neighbors, the residents, the people that live here, the merchants, people who are involved in the neighborhood. Anytime you want to rezone the neighborhood, let us know. And give us an opportunity to provide input on these projects, on the transit infrastructure plan that we're demanding. And that's in a nutshell what we passed pretty much unanimously on Monday night. Yeah. So the exciting part of that was that now we're armed as a unified group with this tool that we can go to these hearings and say, we're part of Affordable Divisadero. We're a coalition of 300, 500 people that have come together throughout various community meetings. And this is what we stand for, and we're not going to take anything less. So, yeah. Oh, go ahead.
I really applaud you for what you've been able to do. And my name's Diana Anderson, and I've lived in the Haight for 45 years, actually. The same house on Sonic Avenue, which now I can't even get out of my house because of the traffic coming up and down the street. But we have an issue in this city where the city is just running over us and not telling anybody about what's going on, but they are making these decisions for us. I have understood that the density in San Francisco now has exceeded the density of New York City, which I find hard to believe. So
Not true. Not true. We're still second.
But I'm not sure that this is the direction that we really want to go. And I'm wondering, is there some way that a whole coalition can say to the city, you know, we cannot get much denser than we are now with the infrastructure issues as well as just quality of life.
Yeah.
Is anyone interested in trying to get something on the ballot to have them say what the density is going to be and what we need in order to maintain that density? We have a business, a pet hospital on Taraval Street. We just found out by accident that they're planning a $20 million redo of Taraval Street, putting in 16 platforms for boarding the Taraval, which takes away 185 parking places, which will just completely decimate the street. And they're taking away stops in front of the Safeway, the library, and the post office to increase 3 minutes of speed from the beach to the West Portal Tunnel where they'll stop anyway. And with no input at all. I only found out about this meeting because I read it on Foodline. We get no information in the city. Does anybody have an idea of how we can make that happen?
I do. It's simple. I believe that this neighborhood plan that we came up with, and I live closer to this neighborhood than I do to DeVis, but the disconnect between City Hall and the supervisors and the people who actually live in these neighborhoods, us, the residents, The neighbors.
The neighbors.
I mean, the only way, you can legislate it, but if you come together and do the sweat equity that we have done, and if this takes off all over the city, they're gonna have to listen to us, absolutely. If we say, we've done all this work and this is what we want, and when you go to develop in future, you're gonna sit with us and we're gonna discuss it.
I'd love to believe that, but I was here during the RAP,
Well,
the rehabilitation area.
2 nights ago at a meeting on this program, Supervisor Yee announced that he will not support this program. Folks have to understand it goes through the Planning Commission, but then it doesn't become law until it's passed by the Board of Supervisors. I spoke with Supervisor Campos today. I've spoken to other supervisors. No one can count to 6 to approve this project, this program. So the question is whether or not we're going to get sucked into an amendment game. And we already see the confusion sowed about rent-controlled units. We have planning department employees saying, oh, well, they won't be touched. And in fact, no such amendment has even been written, and what is being proposed is something far less than an absolute ban. So we're trying to develop HANC, Affordable Divisadero. I believe the Coalition for San Francisco Neighborhoods is trying to develop a position that basically says, look, last month the city was confronted with rebuilding a jail that basically houses, overwhelmingly houses, mentally ill people. That it is basically a mental hospital, the most expensive kind of mental hospital you can imagine. And the supervisor said, we're not going to go down that road even if the state's going to give us money. No, they voted it down 11-0. And instead said, we're going to take a look at creating a mental health facility with that fund. We're going to use that model. Our position is going to be, and we're trying to get as many people to support it as possible. Hell no, we won't go for the developer density program. Vote it down. If the planning department has this voted down, this is the most extraordinary rejection of a professional department in living memory in this town. And I think it's possible. And we'll see what the planning department does. For those of you who follow such matters, the department came up with, as weak as it is, much stronger controls in the mission as a result of the loss of Proposition I. I believe the planning department is feeling the kinds of pressure that exists, but this is crucial to vote down. And our position is don't amend it, vote it down, and go from there. So I think it's possible to push back. Yes,
So
sir.
are you saying that it's probably going to go through on the 28th, but it's more probably a better procedure to try to influence the supervisors because they have the final vote?
The mayor appoints 4 of the planning commissioners. The president of the board of supervisors appoints 3. The chances are very high that this will pass 4-3. There will be some amendments. It will pass 4-3. If one of the mayor's appointees delivers her baby early, she is very pregnant now, it may well be a situation in which the commission will be deadlocked 3-3. Technically, this is a Board of Supervisors initiated planning code amendment, and it does not require the planning commission to approve it. It merely requires the planning commission to hear it. So it's possible, even in that case, if it's a 3-3 tie, that it would go to the Board of Supervisors. So bottom line, it's going to be decided at the Board of Supervisors, not the planning commission. That's the working assumption. Yes?
I have a couple of observations to make, and one of them is that the community meetings, the scheduled community meetings was added only after Peskin's election to the Board of
You
Supervisors.
noticed that?
So I think the assumption was that there was going to be a majority on the Board of Supervisors and that it would be that the
I think you're right.
planning board would pass this easily in December and then it would slip right into the Board of Supervisors and go right through.
I think you're right.
So, these community meetings, well, anyway, we're talking about basically a high-level political game, and now the supervisors are all jockeying for their reelection, which is discouraging. I have a question for you, Kelvin. You showed a map that, you're talking about, development within a quarter mile of transit, routes, and, my understanding is that the R1 and R2 parcels are exempted, and along those routes, and that's why those areas are not teal. It's because they're RH1 and RH2.
I'm sorry, if we showed the map, you would see basically the white areas are the R1D areas of the city.
Right, right.
Yes, those are not affected, correct?
Okay, but you said there was going to be development along the transit corridors.
Correct, correct.
But that excludes RH1 and RH2, doesn't it?
No, not RH1D and RH1, not RH2. RH1 and RH1D. Residential house and residential house detached. Those are the only two zoning districts that this density bonus program does not apply to. The state density bonus program theoretically applies everywhere. Yes?
Thank you. So, does it make a difference if people on the planning commission and the supervisors get emails from people? And if so, who should the emails go to?
Does it make a difference if people on the planning commission and the board of supervisors get emails? Yes, it does. And
who are the swing people? Who should people try to contact?
well, I think we want to contact our potential supporters and swing people. So we have a very interesting political dynamic going on. 3 of the most progressive supervisors are termed out.
And who are those?
Mar in 1, Campos in 9, and Avalos in 11. Those 3 are very clearly opposed to this measure, and they pay no political price for being so. Aaron Peskin has already made it clear that he is opposed, as drafted, to this measure. Supervisor Yee, who faces re-election, has said that he cannot support the measure as currently drafted. It would be inconceivable for me to believe that Supervisor Kim would support this measure, which after all, she is the author of Proposition K. This violates Proposition K, and she is not confused about that, even if Ms. Dersinger might be confused about it. The author of the proposition is not confused. So those 6 votes are pretty certain they should get a lot of emails. There are then 2 other supervisors who are in important races. Supervisor Wiener is running against Supervisor Kim for state senate. And because we have in California now the top 2 vote getters, if one doesn't get 50% of the vote, and I don't believe in June one will, we're going to see 2 elections with the same candidates. We're going to see a primary in June, and we're going to see the November general being Kim against Wiener. So Wiener's, there is not a lot of support from what I understand in District 8, from neighborhood groups in District 8, for this program. Kim will be opposed to it. I don't think he wants to give her, remember the state senate seat is now a citywide race. I don't think he wants to give her that advantage. So I think Wiener might well find it, if there are 6 votes against it, he might well consider voting against it. Supervisor Bree is in a district that I'm pretty certain is adamantly opposed to this measure. And I think we'll find it to her political benefit. She's already indicated she's willing to play the game of amendments. I think that Supervisor Breed, seeing 6 votes against it, might well vote against it. But understand, you don't need 8 votes to make this veto-proof. The mayor cannot veto a measure voted down. So if 6 votes will be enough, but I think it could well be 8 votes. But 6 votes is enough because the mayor can't veto a no. Yeah.
Just wanted to make two last points. One is that before I came to San Francisco 30 years ago, I was a senior industrial engineer, or in more common parlance, an efficiency expert. And so I was very startled in October when they had the first hearing on this, because this was all about efficiency in the planning department. They were going to remove all of the things that slow down, all of the public hearings, all of those pesky details, and that was a major component of this plan, which didn't seem terribly democratic to me. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention was that in answering another question yesterday, Kirsten said, and of course this eliminates the density guidelines.
Right.
And she said, well, why do eliminate the density guidelines? Because it's covered by other things. She didn't bother to give it much of an explanation. But so don't expect density guidelines if this goes through.
Thank you. Yes.
Did I read in the Chronicle that Supervisors Peskin and Kim drafted legislation to go to the board about raising the percentage of affordability and the fee to be paid if you want to?
The fee is not raised,
And
but it is to 25%.
yeah, so is that sort of them launching a volley saying it's going to be up for you, or does it apply to this? I would assume it does.
Well, yes, it would. The language in the proposed ordinance is that you have to meet section 415, the inclusionary zoning ordinance, as drafted. I would differ from the assertion that this is an extension of the inclusionary zoning program by adding the 18%. The inclusionary zoning program caps BMRs at 120% of median. That's section 415. This is a whole new thing. No one has ever defined affordable housing as being 140% of median, and it's certainly not part of the inclusionary zoning program. So the answer is yes, they will put on the ballot a measure which will remove the charter restriction of increasing the inclusionary zoning ordinance and allow the Board of Supervisors by ordinance to do it. So it doesn't do it itself. You first have to change the charter and give the power to the board to do it, but it is their intention, indeed, some folks that I know are busy drafting the legislation right now. But yes, the mayor has also announced that he's going to form one of his blue ribbon committees to also come forward with a inclusionary zoning charter amendment. So we'll see which one, what happens around that. But you're absolutely correct, and the Chronicle actually covered some news.
Yeah, at this meeting that people have referenced on Tuesday, I asked questions about the impacts on our neighborhood commercial districts, which, you know, I live in the inner Sunset. The 9th and Irving corridor would be destroyed. There are so many single-story buildings, and some of them are combined. They're like big buildings that have been broken up into smaller businesses. And the answer to the planning department was really incredible. It was, don't worry, after this is adopted, we're going to study what to do about the impacts. That was truly her answer. I quoting exactly.
Who said that?
Anyway, we're talking about in our area, getting a hold of the merchants, because I don't think merchants have any idea what's going on. So we're talking about passing out some sort of.
We have a
flyer.
meeting scheduled with the Haight Ashbury Merchants Association on this very subject.
We have kind of a bad merchants association.
Well, we have a very
We're gonna put together something and pass it out to the merchants to let them know what's going on, and I hope.
I think
people in other
that's
neighborhoods
critically
do-
important, Dennis. I think it's critically important. Yes, in the back.
Hi, I'm Jennifer, and I live in the inner Richmond, and I too came here as an interloper. I really think a lot of people in my district don't know about what's going on, merchants and residents, and I would love to have something to pass out, to hand out door to door, and I can get 10 people to leaflet my district. This is so important.
Talk to Joseph.
Yeah, we're gonna be actually at the meeting tomorrow. We're gonna be putting together a plan. Actually, we have a staff person who's gonna be putting together outreach material for businesses, for residents.
Great.
So yes, I should probably put my contact information.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Try again.
Yeah, I would suggest, because I think we've talked about needing a merchant strategy in order to do this, because that's gonna give us an extra boost in effort and support. It should be a common document that we can come up with, that maybe a two-sided piece that we can pass out in every merchant, every commercial district in every neighborhood. Particularly in the ones in that blue swath that go toward the northeast from 5 to 6 to 3 to whatever.
2. Yes.
My concern is that there is a part of this plan that actually, like, I completely agree with you about all the procedural stuff, and yeah, I mean, that's basically the calling, and also that the supervisors could absolutely legislate affordability, so there's no reason to have this, just to get more affordable housing, and I completely agree with you about that. What I like about the plan, which I would not like to see this baby thrown out with the bathwater, is that it does address underutilized, however many there were, the 340. That's a lot of, sites throughout the city that are just surface parking, that are, I mean, I spoke with Andy Thornley, who is running to fill Eric Morris' seat in D1, and he said he would like to see a pilot project where, for example, 19th and Fury, on 3 out of 4 corners, there's a 1-story bank. It's like Wells Fargo, or, which is not architecturally significant.
Absolutely.
Why can't those places get torn down? And, and who would object to that? And then especially with Fury BRT, supposedly going through some time in our lifetimes, those are the kinds of things that I would like to see focused on.
Supervisor, the previous supervisor in District 1, Jake McCollum, had a proposal dealing with BRT to increase residential density along the corners, corner lots, especially quote-unquote soft sites. If you take a look at many of the soft sites, they're in fact corner lots. And I think that's a rational thing. One of the things that we will propose to the Board of Supervisors is to form a task force made up of residents who know that part of the world and deal with the soft site issue. I don't think anybody who knows anything about this issue disagrees with you on the need to do higher density development on soft sites. The question is, and the damning thing about this measure, is that it talks about soft sites, but it's bait and switch. What they're really talking about is demolition and new construction.
So then how can you shift that focus, if you just nix the whole thing, but that's a really valuable.
Start all over.
People have been talking soft sites and development of soft sites, and there are plans to deal with soft sites. Nobody's gonna walk away from that issue.
It's in the article too. So yeah, and then we have actually pictures of some soft sites and some kind of discussion about how to address them. But you're right, it's something that actually planning has tried to do before. There was a whole initiative around developing parking lots next to supermarkets, and even developing like the whole site. Maybe there's an air rights development over the supermarket. Spur got involved in the grocery store, but Okay, this is where it gets really insidious, of course, is that the grocery stores couldn't figure out how to make enough money off of this program. They wanted all kinds of concessions, and so it fell apart. It's a difficult one. It does need to be progressed neighborhood by neighborhood to identify the sites and then figure out how do we get higher levels of affordable, how do we like hold these initiatives accountable so we get the development, get higher levels of affordable.
Certainly in the affordable Divisadero process, using neighborhood, folks in new neighborhoods, and there is a broad consensus to see greater density on the soft sites along the Divisadero corridor, of which there are several. So I don't think this is going to, I mean, it is an answer. It is a rational answer. And I think what the Affordable Divisadero Plan indicated is you get rational people, San Franciscans, down at the table, and they'll trade density for real affordable housing. And I think that's very real. And this whole notion that this is some sort of NIMBY reaction is, I think, does us all, is insulting and does us all a disservice.
Okay, first of all, the lady was talking about the removing the transit stops. They're actually doing that all over the city and they claim there's been a lot of outreaches. We see by that lady, there isn't that much outreach. They always claim this. When we use words like affordable and progressive, they're meaningless unless you define them. Willie Brown said that everybody is a progressive. If you have to make $100,000 a year to afford affordable housing, that housing is not affordable because I believe it's something like 20% of San Franciscans live in poverty. And we need dollar figures when we talk about the housing. Also, we need some sort of controls in the appearance of building. We don't want an entire city of La Boulange or Sunset. And right now, it seems like you can build anything. And these structures don't fit in with the neighborhood. It seems as though London Breed is offering an amendment. That means she wants to vote for it. You know, why would she, if she was voting against it, she wouldn't need to be offering an amendment to change it. But the amendment she's making, it seems like it's a sneaky amendment where she's, after 1 year when nobody's watching, we're going to be able to then change it and make this whole thing.
But she will learn that we watch all the time. And she'll change again. She changed on the Divisadero, she'll change on this. Or she won't be there.
Yeah. I was thinking about London Breed is after Dean had been doing his tenant boot camps for quite a while, she decided to do one the day before she did her announcement.
Yes.
And I think the reason she did it is because she might be evicted. I mean, it was quite clear she was there. She was asking for money. That's what just happened. So she's getting scared. So anything she might do is because she's a little bit nervous, and that means she's now one of us.
Evicted from her residence or evicted
from her residence.
She did come to us for counseling help. Yeah, because she's, no, I'm serious, because her building is sold, and just like a lot of people in San Francisco, when your building gets sold and then the...
Did you tell her to accept a buyout?
And then the landlord starts to do renovation work.
Yes, sir.
So I don't want to interrupt me. I was in touch with the planning department this afternoon, and so on the phone and in writing and also in a comment on Hoodlawn, Dersinger affirmed that the program will exclude rent-controlled housing in perpetuity, not for 1 year. But that's what she wrote. That's what the updated case report that was on the planning department site said this afternoon. I've got the text here if you want to see it.
That's what she's been saying.
But where's the legislation?
I'm saying the amendment that it specifies it's forever and ever rent control. I'm not defending. I'm just saying
Right,
this is what.
right, great.
You're saying.
Yeah, it's so great. Yeah, in the back.
Okay, I guess this could be kind of off topic, but somebody brought up, about the bus stops being closed down, and that's impacted me personally because I have osteoarthritis, and it's hard for me to walk, even one block or more, and I recently had a surgery on my knee, and there used to be a bus stop right in front of my house, and they moved it to, I'm on McAllister and Central, they moved it 1 block over to Lyon, so even that for walking
Is
down
on the 5? The
yeah.
5 line?
And now they completely took away that stop. Originally, when they did these changes, they said they were going to have it so nobody would have to walk more than 1 block to the bus stop. And now I have to walk 2 blocks, either to Baker or to Masonic to catch the bus. That's really hard. And I think it's really hard also for a lot of other disabled or elderly people, this reduction in bus stops.
Well, we live in a lovely city. the organizing concept of the SFMTA is if we have fewer bus stops, we have better community service. If you remember,
Less is more.
Mayor Newsom decided that the problem that we had with too much garbage on the streets could be solved by reducing the garbage can.
Putting in fewer seats.
Yes.
Maybe going forward also, it makes sense to hold their feet to the fire on the lack of community service, just in the sense that the city's rolling in money now. We got all these people coming in, and you can't get on the 7, you can't get on the 43, you can't. So it's clear they have no intention of making this a more livable city, because they won't raise taxes on these developers or developer fees or on the building owners downtown to pay for enough community drive.
Let me break the news to you. We're not rolling in money. The projected deficit
for
this year is $90 million, and for next year, it's $240 million.
And they're blaming it all on the city employees.
Right, they're blaming it on city employees.
They're underfunded.
Calvin,
Yes.
can I-
If we want to push for a continuance at the planning commission, another one, they have until April 3rd now to decide. That was a new 90-day limit was put on. January 25th is when the junior legislation will go to the Land Use and Transportation Committee for hearing. It's my understanding if you get to this peak there, you don't, there's no public comment for
That's full.
yeah. And on January 19th, Tang and company and the team from planning are going to hold a meeting at the rec center in Sunset, and it's not just for District 4. There's nothing about it being District 4. It's just, and it's got a capacity of 174 people. So if anybody can make it to that meeting, we need to be there because they may pack it.
Say when it is.
Say it again.
January 19th.
What are you talking about?
The 19th of January is going to be a meeting.
What time? 6 o'clock?
Well, no, I gotta get to that. I don't have it right offhand, but
No,
you'll
it's
find
on
it.
one of the handouts.
You'll find it if you look.
Oh, this is the planning commission?
It's Supervisor Jay, who is the official sponsor of the density program. She and Mayor Lee are the two sponsors.
They're going to have a meeting where?
At the Sunset
Recreation Center at Tuesday, about the 30th and lot.
It's on this sheet, it says,
In the bowl.
7 to 8:30 PM.
Okay, very good.
Yes.
I think Karen had a question.
Oh, yeah.
That was sneaky.
Yeah.
I had a question for you and then a question for Dean. You said that there will if this passes, there will no longer be a relationship between lot size and number of units. Does that mean that this is also a way for them to start bringing in these little squirrel cages, these tiny micro units?
There is a minimum size. They require a minimum size of units. I'm sorry.
Calvin, the person says no minimum size.
Okay, so the answer is
I just want to mention, and preaching to the converted, but bringing up the bus stops and the Muni Forward and the Haight Realm, which is moving forward, and all these things that have been happening over the last few years on this trust us attitude. If you haven't gotten invigorated to support affordable diviz and what they're talking about yet, then please start listening, because the Muni thing was just the beginning of what's moving forward into the housing.
Karen had another question.
I'm sorry.
I have a question for Dean, and that is, maybe I missed this, but I really am very unhappy with the way the term affordable housing is migrating up and up and up the ladder. And so I'm wondering, in your plan, do you just say affordable housing, or do you really define it?
Yeah, so we, and Gus touched on this a bit. I mean, we spent a lot of time, the affordability group, and I would say in our various meetings, debating this and actually trying to settle it. And I think the concept that really took hold for us is if it's not affordable to a majority of San Francisco residents, it's not affordable. Like that, so what that means, and now that's a little different, right, than the city's perspective even before all of this, right? I mean, because even under Prop K, for example, it's 120% of the area median income, and, you know, that's not, you know, affordable to a majority of San Franciscans. But that was the dividing line that we felt was a very simple, both in terms of as a message that kind of resonated with us and that we thought would resonate with the public, is let's stop calling housing that is unaffordable to a majority of San Franciscans, let's stop calling that affordable housing. Whether that gets adopted, and again, we view affordable division, our community plan, as a potential template. Other neighborhoods may adjust what they want in their neighborhood and come up with a different line for that. But it's, as Calvin pointed out, it's quite different from what is part of the bonus program.
Is the affordable house, how does it differ from a house that is not called an affordable house? Is it smaller?
It is price control, no. It is price control.
Okay, so it's the exact same building, but the developer's gonna sell it at a lower price.
Right.
And you have to qualify to buy that.
Correct.
Even though you get a great big bonus a year later, and you get all the money you want, you still get to have that.
No, you're not.
Okay, now this is, you don't. No, you don't. You don't get kicked out.
Yes, you
What
do.
if it's a rental, you do. But not if you buy it.
Right, not if you buy it.
Not if you buy it. So, I've got this house because I couldn't afford anything else. I got this.
No. BMRs are not
Not,
sold.
no, below Margarita, I'm not talking about those.
Okay,
I'm
I'm
talking about affordable house.
Condos.
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 Right, that you buy. Yeah.
Condos.
BMRs are condos. Condos are BMRs.
Some of them.
They're
can be
priced,
bought.
yes,
Some
but
of them
and they
can be
are
rented.
price controlled. The resale is price
That's
controlled.
right.
Right.
But you're not kicked out if you
Right, but
own
you're-
it and your income changed.
Yes.
You're kicked out if you rent it and your income changed.
Once you buy it, you don't have to
So if
resell
your
it.
income goes down
That's an interesting
Yes,
question.
yes,
That's
we asked
an
this question. We asked this question at the,
That's a fact. Tuesday.
Yeah.
Yeah. So now
Yeah,
Tuesday.
so it's interesting that, what I wanted to say is, I'm not here and really concerned about affordable housing. I don't mean to be callous. I understand people need a place to stay, and I'm sure we'll address it. I'm really concerned about the city that I love, okay, which is a collection of villages and scale. Okay?
Yes,
It's
thank
not,
you.
No, I'm saying those days are.
okay,
Those days
I'm
are
preaching to the choir,
under threat.
okay? But what I see happening here, and all these pictures that I've seen, is the city just changing architecturally into something that's, I don't recognize anymore.
Right.
It's, pardon me? It could be anywhere in America.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for
That's,
that.
so affordable housing, great, okay, now we're gonna bend over backward for this affordable housing issue and lose the character of our city and say, look, aren't we great, look what we did. I don't know, I'm not that altruistic, right? Okay, but the city is a collection of villages. When you talk about scale and density and height limits and no sunshine, that breaks my heart. It breaks my heart, really. I walked down here and I said, what a great city. I'm looking at a building and I go, oh my gosh, that could go up.
In
Peace.
the back.
Two questions. The first one, are there any units in this program that would be less than 20 units and then not susceptible to the transportation sustainability fees that would apply to it? That's the first question. Second question, is there any unintended consequences of who's going to occupy these? Specifically, I'm looking towards San Jose, because Apple, in addition to building the spaceship that's under construction now, is also planning a large facility at, near the airport at Brokaw and 101. And then Samsung is into North San Jose. So with the number of tech buses, because a lot of those cities down there don't want to build the housing, and we're becoming the...
You cannot enforce, it is illegal in the United States of America to enforce residency requirements.
Right, I understand that, but is the unintended consequence going to be, we're going to build this housing?
And we're gonna house Silicon Valley's workforce?
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Really?
Yes, that's what it's all about.
40%.
Then we're gonna have density bought by international speculators.
Because Santa Clara won't do density increases.
Right.
So why don't we
Because
do it?
San Mateo, because we're
So why don't we do it?
nuts.
Why don't we do it?
Because they beg, yes.
Change the formula for affordable housing, that's sort of a precursor of the stretching of the income of the, the average, was this recent election, I'm just a little blurry on it, but did that make, was this sort of an opening into this whole plan, but, was it something that, for the vacant spaces in the city that they just had this past?
For the public sites measure.
Public sites and then.
No, it didn't, no,
Within that, they changed the formula for.
No, it did not change AMI definitions of affordability.
So is
Prop
that-
J did not change.
Anything that they are currently trying to do, is that something that is resulting, like you're saying, it's the board of supervisors can vote on the definition of what constitutes, how much above the median,
Yes, yes.
That's in what.
Yes. I'm trying to see somebody. I have a call on you.
I just wanted to say that I completely agree with keeping the character of the city, with our little villages and the identity of each neighborhood. But I also wanted to say that I think having that affordability piece in there and keeping the people who give the character to the city, our artists, our writers, our teachers, is also a really huge, important part, and you can't have one necessarily without the other. I just wanted to see that.
Well, if you have 30% subsidized housing, or below market rate housing, that means you have 70% at market rate.
Right,
Gee,
that's right.
which is, and we know that is gonna be less and less diversity.
Yeah, exactly.
Let's make it even more confusing. You can be below market rate, but not affordable.
Right.
In this town.
Sure.
In a town that is the highest housing market costs in the United States, or it goes back before New York. You can be below market rate and still not be affordable to a majority of San Franciscans. So let's be clear, when we hear the planning department talk about how great BMR units are, they're not talking about, they don't use the term affordable units. They use BMR, because BMR are below market rate, not affordable to people earning below median income. It's an important distinction. So the first creep is from affordable to BMR. And then it is from defining middle class as being 140% of median.
How do they define below market rate?
Below market rate is defined by HUD as being 120% of median or below. Very low income is to 40% of median. Low income is to 50% of median. Moderate income is to 80% of median. And all of these are, and that's paying no more than 30% of your total income for housing. That's the two aspects. I know affordable housing is misused. It's misused by politicians. It's misused on late night TV. It's misused all the time, but there is a technical definition that is used in San Francisco. We have 30,000 permanently affordable housing units able to be afforded by people earning below median income, paying no more than 30% of their total income for rent. How many of you pay 30% of your total income for rent? None.
I do.
You know, unless you live in affordable housing, and it's
Rent
not
control.
impossible.
There
It
wasn't
just
any.
takes other people's money.
Rent control works. Rent control.
We are at a point right now where this is one of the few moments in history where the politicians will listen to you. And it's because a year ago, Mayor Lee seemed invincible, such that he didn't have a candidate run against him. But what did he actually get in the election? 55%. My goodness.
No, he got 51%
okay.
of those who voted.
Right, and the thing is, the perception
Not
of
how many
him
voted for mayor, but those
not
who went to
having
the
power
polls and
will
voted.
go down if we make a stink now.
He's over. In
Well,
City
they don't
Hall,
know it yet.
he's already
You gotta
over.
prove it.
No, the Board of Supervisors knows he's over. I mean, the minute you're reelected in a two-term limit, you're over, you're on the down. And
Oh, no,
this one, no one is gonna bail Ed Lee out. He's on his own. So we've got to leave the room in 2 minutes. So I'm gonna ask for 2 votes. One, the position of the Haight Ashbury Neighborhood Council is to oppose, as drafted, the developer density program, to work with labor, tenants, and other neighborhood organizations to form a common front at the Board of Supervisors to push for the voting down of this measure and the creation of an inclusive process to go through.
So moved.
Right.
Second.
The board has recommended that position. I would, if there's no objection, it's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Discussion of the vote.
Okay. Can someone call the question, please? Yes.
So, we've heard from one side of the issue. Has everyone made up their minds already?
Yes.
All right, then you don't need to hear from me. I live in this neighborhood. I have a different opinion, but this is not the Haight Ashbury.
Go ahead.
Go ahead.
No?
Yes.
Yes, hey, go.
Yes, okay. Okay. Where to start? Yeah, right.
Yeah.
This looks to me, I mean, I had not heard of this proposition before I saw this week that we're having a meeting about it. I came to the meeting and I was surprised to hear that somebody is proposing that we raise the height limits from like 3 stories to 5 stories, because I've been suggesting this for years as a way to get around our housing issues, right? We always have a shortage of housing. It's always too expensive. The obvious thing is you make more, right? If there's high demand and not enough supply, you make more supply. Now, we've heard tons and tons about this percentage of that thing we disagree with. Do people generally disagree that we want higher population density on transit corridors, fewer cars, and you know, basically that sounded to me like the progressive thing to do.
At whose expense?
It doesn't work that way. It just sounds like it will.
Who pays for it?
Well, in
Other
this
people
case,
get
no,
their
I mean,
homes demolished and the businesses get demolished in order to create it?
well, so the other thing is, all over this neighborhood, I see single-family houses, right, next to like 4-story corner buildings. You're not going to be able to increase the density without knocking down some of these 1-story buildings and putting up new buildings. Now,
They contribute to the character of our neighborhood, though.
Why do we need more density?
We don't need more, I don't want more
because
density.
there are more people who want to live here. than-
Well, they don't get to
Why do
live
we
here.
need to
We
have
don't
more
need to
people
build them
live here?
places.
Oh, so don't let anybody else come in. Right.
Right.
That sounded like NIMBY to me.
Well, I don't
That's
care,
not
it's my
NIMBY.
position.
That's like no overcrowding.
Tearing down a whole building, you're gonna put up something that doesn't fit the neighborhood, that's generally what's happened. The second point is that, where you're saying somebody should be forced to leave so some developer can put in a bigger building. The third point is, you're
Wait.
making an assumption that just because you build more housing, that the rents are gonna be lower, or the house prices will be lower, but actually, they're building luxury housing to begin with, so it's not gonna be affordable.
I have an example of the positive way that you're trying to look at it. Amiano appointed me